You know, I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time.
Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro was on BBC being interviewed by another conservative journalist, Andrew Neil. And this was an incredible interview. So I got a few clips to show you. Let me start with this first one where Andrew Neil asks Ben Shapiro about what are the American conservative ideas that are being offered by the Republican Party.
I'm interested that you think there's a thought movement inside the Republican Party. I mean, haven't the Conservatives run out of ideas in America? All the new policies, the Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, the Green New Deal, they're all coming from the left, and they're popular.
Well, frankly, I'm confused by the idea that any of those are particularly new ideas. I mean, most of those ideas have been around since Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the very earliest, or at the very latest, rather. Some of them go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. But the idea that new ideas are absent in the Republican Party is obviously untrue. We have a very strong debate that goes on inside sort of the conservative halls of intelligentsia about what is the appropriate action to take with regard to the medical system. Should global warming be considered a real threat, or should global warming be considered something that technology will solve? And if so, what are the best aspects of solving that? Now, there's a rich intellectual debate on the right about nationalism versus patriotism, for example, or populism versus free marketeerism. That debate is happening on the right to sort of suggest that the right in America is bereft of ideas, but the left is full of ideas. Number one, not all ideas are good ideas. I mean, AOC is pretty good evidence of that. I'm a big fan of some old ideas myself that I think are pretty good. But beyond that, I think that it is intellectual sneering of the highest order to suggest that only the left has new and decent ideas.
All right, let's do what a lot of Ben Shapiro fans don't do, and that's actually slow down what he's saying and figure out if he actually offered anything, any answer at all, to this question of what the Republican Party is offering in terms of new ideas. So he first says, the idea that new ideas are absent in the Republican Party is obviously untrue. Well, let's look at the new ideas. So he first says, oh, what is the appropriate action to take in regard to the medical system? Doesn't present any ideas. He just says, what are the appropriate actions? What are the appropriate actions that we should take in regards to the medical system? That's what he led with. He led with a question in terms of what are the appropriate actions? No idea. He just led with a question on what are the actions, but he didn't actually offer anything. The next one. Should global warming be considered a real threat or something that technology will solve? Okay, so let me actually slow it down for you. Should global warming be considered a real threat or something that technology will solve? This is a false dichotomy. The fact is, it is a threat, and the idea that it's a threat is actually a new idea for the conservative movement. So he could have said that. He could have said, well, conservatives now actually, at least some of them recognize that climate change is in fact real. So that's new. But because he would completely expose how how unscientific and stupid the Republican Party is, he's not going to say it that way. But yeah, so in terms of like the technology, like, okay, so global warming, yes, is a real threat. And let's also look at technology. It's not an either or. So the technology is renewable energy. But are conservatives having the discussion about this at all? Are they offering any ideas? Are there any bills on the table about climate change from Republicans? No, they're not offering anything to deal with this. Now, Ben, though, you should look this up after you watch this video. Ben has presented an idea to address climate change. He has said in the past, well, all you got to do is sell your home. If you're on one of these coastal cities where you're going to get flooded, sell your home. Sell your home. When climate change becomes a real threat and in fact the sea levels are rising and your house is about to be flooded out, sell your home. Just sell your home because people are going to want to buy a home that is about to be underwater. This is Ben Shapiro logic. He also says here, oh, how about the idea of free markets versus populism? First of all, that doesn't really make sense. It should be actually free trade versus protectionism. But he says there in that same breath, nationalism versus patriotism. Yes, the new discussion of nationalism versus patriotism, where in 1945, George Orwell distinguished between nationalism and patriotism. Oh, so many new ideas from the Republican Party. Ben Shapiro offered nothing. He didn't even really give any old ideas. He gave no ideas at all. He just discussed conversations. Oh, well, we have to have the nationalism versus patriotism and the discussion of the medical system and climate change. But he didn't offer any ideas. But for a lot of people, Ben Shapiro speaks so fast that you don't even realize that he's not actually saying anything. Now, let's get to the next clip here where Ben gets owned. I'm going to show you exactly why.
Some of the ideas that are popular in your side of politics would seem to take us back to the Dark Ages, Georgia, new abortion laws, which you are much in favor of, that a woman who miscarries could get 30 years. A Georgian woman who travels to another state for an abortion procedure could get 10 years. These are extreme hard policies.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
I'm a journalist that asks questions. Why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected. Now, back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not. It never has been. And you as a journalist are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the Dark Ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Mr.
Seriously,
Shapiro,
it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it.
Andrew Neil, the massive leftist. Oh, yes. Andrew Neil, the huge left-winger. I'm going to get to that in a second. But first, Ben Shapiro. Well, you know, late periods are obviously a human life, so it's just science. Yep. And also, I don't believe in universal health care. I mean, once that child is born and the mother, no, they do not deserve health care. No human being needs health care. That's just science. I don't know how anybody takes Ben Shapiro seriously. But Andrew Neil. Oh, my God. Andrew Neil on the left. Let's read a little bit about Andrew Neil. Neil was appointed editor of the Sunday Times by Rupert Murdoch, the creator of Fox News, as well as many conservative outlets across the globe. And Neil served in this position from 1983 to 1994. After this, he became a contributor to the Daily Mail. He was formerly chief executive and editor-in-chief of the Press Holdings Group. In 1988, he became the founding chairman of Sky TV, also part of Murdoch's News Corporation. He is the current chairman of Press Holdings Media Group, whose titles include The Spectator, which is one of Britain's leading conservative magazines, and the ITP Media Group. As of 2019, Neil presents live political programs This Week on BBC One and Politics Live on BBC Two. Yes, Andrew Neil, the massive leftist. Let me just also share this opinion here from what people have said about Andrew Neil in the past. So this is from Owen Jones. If the BBC is politically neutral, how does it explain Andrew Neil? He symbolizes the right-wing domination of our media, yet a politics presenter as aligned to the left would not be tolerated. Neil's Twitter account, which has hundreds of thousands of followers thanks to his BBC gig, is routinely used to promote right-wing causes. He uses this platform to denounce the scientific consensus on climate change, reviling what he calls the climate mafia, and claiming that deviation from the consensus meant the witch finders want to burn you. It is not the first time he has deviated from scientific consensus. Now, I will link to that Guardian article below my video so you can read the full context and understand who Andrew Neil is. Andrew Neil is not on the left. Now, this last clip here is just beautiful because Ben Shapiro throws a tantrum and runs from the interview because he cannot answer the questions.
You write about, Judeo-Christian culture and so on, but so much of what you've said in the past would seem to turn its back on Judeo-Christian culture.
You're lecturing me on Judeo-Christian culture after you call the pro-life position barbaric?
I just
Really?
asked you a question.
and I asked you a question. You failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't
questions?
frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this. But that's not the issue. You have a new book out.
Then why the hell are you interviewing me, sir?
It's an interesting book. But my point is, your book claims that
well, it'd be nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is, well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again, if you would let me just finish the question. Your book
frankly,
claims
I don't think
that society
honestly,
is turning its back
sir,
on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah,
what are those values? What are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
Oh, my God. For Ben Shapiro to be owned by a conservative. This shows you Ben Shapiro is so used to his safe spaces. He's not used to actually being questioned on the things that he has said. I mean, Shapiro was simply owned by facts and logic. And by the way, the Andrew Neil mentioned there, or Ben Shapiro claimed that Andrew Neil called the Shapiro's pro-life, which is anti-abortion position, that Neil called it barbaric. Neil was actually referring to, if you watch the full interview, Neil called throwing women in jail for miscarriages barbaric, which I guess Shapiro agrees with, because at no point in the interview did he push back against the idea that a woman who miscarries should be thrown in jail. So if you agree with that position, yeah, that's barbaric. Now, let me share some reactions to this this fantastic interview. So this from Tom Gara. Ben Shapiro takes a brief departure from facts, not caring about feelings, by telling one of the most prominent conservatives in the UK media that he's a leftist shill. James Felton. Here's regular user of the term snowflake, Ben Shapiro, shortly before he ran away from an interview because he found Andrew Neil to be too left-wing. This from Classical Liberal with a 3. Ben Shapiro going on BBC and demanding conservative Andrew Neil admit he's a leftist, then crying about how unfair it is to be asked critical questions about his book before running away from the interview, shows how these American conservatives are accustomed to their safe spaces. Exactly. Ben Shapiro, owned by facts and logic. Apparently, his feelings really do matter. They appear to be what matters most to Ben Shapiro. He couldn't take the heat, even though I wouldn't have really called any of this heat. You can watch the full interview on the BBC. I'll link to it below the video. The questions were fair. He was asking him about his previous comments, about Shapiro's previous comments. Shapiro did not want to face the fact that he has said a lot of dumb crap and could not justify any of it. So good on Andrew Neil, even though I agree with him on likely nothing. Good job by Andrew Neil by just being a journalist and asking normal questions.